Okay, hi everyone. Thanks for joining my session. So I'm Michael. I'm a data scientist for PlayStudios Israel, and today, as introduced, I'm going to speak about retargeting. Okay, so what we'll go through today is first we will introduce what is retargeting, what its benefits and its risks and potential. Afterwards, we will go through to optimize your retargeting campaign. What is the definition of churn? How do we define it? How do we define user value? And what is the right time to retarget? And finally, we will close up the show in measuring the retargeting performance, where we specify certain KPIs that you should be monitoring in order to estimate how well your retargeting campaigns are going. Okay. Okay. So the retargeting definition, the action of reaching out through ads to a user that already showed some interest in your product. Okay, so here we put up two of our ads running in Facebook, and generally they're aiming on returning a user that already lapsed. As you see, we are saying we missed you. Obviously, we are looking to retarget users that already showed some interest in our app, and not new users that don't know us. Yeah. Okay, so heading to the motivation. What is the motivation in retargeting, specific in gaming, which this is the industry that I'm coming from, is trying to return a user that is valuable to you, given that he churned. Now, as you might notice, I bolded out two of the terms in this sentence, which are valuable and churned, because these two variables are pretty much vaguely defined, right? Like they are very subjective in their definitions, because each company, even each one in this room, can define churn and value a certain way that he thinks of. And we will attack it through a data analysis approach to define it fully through statistics today. Okay, so what is the retargeting potential? Here I put up a caption with 6 of our users. Each user is in a different bulk. On the x-axis, this is just the time period, and on the y-axis, this is the aggregated revenue of the user in the app through its entire connection with our app, okay? And these users are made a retargeting action. How do we know it? By the dashed vertical line each user have. This is the exact moment that the user made a retargeting action. And let's focus, for example, on the top left user. So we see that the user was active in our app, generated a little bit of revenue, and then he was lapsed for a very period of time, which is the red region before the vertical line occurred. And we can see that once this user got back to us, he even tripled his revenue relating to the past revenue that he left with, okay? And we see this phenomena occurs in any one of these users, like each user, we can see his revenue rises. And obviously I did some sort of cherry picking with these users, but we can well see the retargeting potential by this caption here. Okay. So after going through the potential, let's talk a little bit about the risks. So there are two kinds of risks in retargeting. The first kind of risk is trying to retarget too early, right? If we retarget, or too late, too late. So if we target too late, users might forget our product or move to competitors, and this will result probably lower CTRs. And if our campaigns are like retargeted by impression, like we pay per impression, this will cause a higher cost per returned user, right? The second kind of risk is retargeting too early, okay? So if we retarget too early, we might target in paid ads users that would have returned organically, right? Like let's take it to the extreme scenario where we target users that been in our app yesterday, okay? If a user was yesterday in our app, most likely he will return like today, right? So it won't be then beneficial to us to bring back users that would have returned organically. Now, the second less intuitive thing in this retargeting too early scenario is cannibalism on other networks we're working with, okay? Let's go through this scenario. So let's say that a user joined through network X and then start depositing and becomes a whale, okay? And then let's say that he didn't connect for 3 days. And now I'll take the scenario that our retargeting strategy is to promoting ads to users after 3 days they didn't visit the app, okay? Now that this specific user didn't visit the app for 3 days, and therefore, by our retargeting strategy, he will be showing ads, right? So let's say that the user seen the ad, clicked on it, got back to the app, and start depositing, okay? Then he kept depositing, as he once did. Now, what happened in this scenario is that all the revenue that was generated after the retargeting occurred was attributed to the retargeting campaign, right? So let's say that we're looking at the retargeting campaign in this scenario, and we're saying, wow, this is a perfect campaign. Its ROAS is great. It's like recoup very fast. But we neglect the fact that we extracted a very important user from network X, right? Because we transcended the attribution from network X to the retargeting campaign when the retargeting occurred. So people might look only at the retargeting campaign performance, but they need to take into account the reduction of network X performance in this sense. And in this sense, this is sort of a cannibalism because the retargeting campaign success sort of ate the network X success, okay? Okay, so after moving through the introduction, let's get to the main thing, which is optimizing your retargeting campaign, okay? Sorry. Okay, so the first block in the road to optimization is the definitions, okay? So let's first define what is churn, okay? Because how do we define churn, right? Because user can like be absent from the app for 3, 7, 100 days and still will have a positive, sort of positive probability for him to return organically, right? So we need to know when do we cross the line, after 14 days, after 7 days of lapse, and this graph here can help us very much in deciding this threshold of time period. So on the x-axis, this is the number of days a user left, okay, number of days absent from the app, and on the y-axis, this is the probability of a user to return by himself, okay, organically. And as we would expect, this graph declines because the more time that the user left the app, the more time that we didn't see it, the less likely he will return by himself. Okay, so how do we read this line? These axes are pretty like, we don't see it clearly, but this is 21 here, okay? So I read this as 21 days of lapsed. So in 21 days, we have sort of 10% probability that the user will return by himself. If we go for 7 days lapse, there is sort of a 35% probability that the user will return by himself, okay? This is how we read this graph. And this can help us defining what is churn. But as a campaign manager, does this graph very help us if we're looking at all the users in the app? Probably not very much, because like, we don't want to target the entire population in our app, right? It's cost very, very much, and we would like to segmentize our population of retargeting to a certain population that will be relevant to us, right? So maybe it can give us more value to like split this graph into segments of favorable population that can like shed us more light regarding our campaign. Okay, so the most intuitive things to do is like on the left, split the graph, split this curve into pair and non-pair groups. And on the red line is the non-pairs, the blue line is the pairs, okay? And we know that pairs are much more engaged in the app relating non-pairs, right? So how does this engagement affect? It affects the probability they will return by themselves. How do we know it? Let's take, for example, day 7 here, okay? On day 7, the non-pairs have a probability of 20% to return on their own, organically. Whereas if we're escalating to the payers population, they have around 45% of returning on their own. So it's more than twice likely that paying user will return after 7 days than a non-paying user. Okay, this is how we conclude this graph. And we can do several certain splits of, for example, this is like a split between the age of the user in the app when he churned. So age group between 0 and 7, 7 to 14, and so on. Here, this is the 0 to 7 population, and we see how the age in the app critically affect the organic probability for a user to return, where we can see on day 3, the 0 to 7 users population have only 10% of returning rate, where if we look at users that are over 90 days old and they left for 3 days, they have, like on the pink curve, around 80%. So as we can see, the churn definition is very, very affected by which user left you. So this is very important to know what are the characteristic of the users that left in order to define if they churned. Okay, now after defining churn, let's head on and defining the value of our users. The value of our users is very, very defined, highly determined by how much they paid before they left, okay? So on the right, we split the graph into purchasing groups, $0 to $2, $2 to $10, and so on. And this is the revenue before they got retargeted, I remind you, okay? So we don't see the labels, but generally we see that the more engaged users, meaning the more money they invested in the app before they left, the higher the probability they will return organically. So we already know, right? Engagement equals higher probability to return organically. But in order to know what the value of our users, let's focus on the left graph, okay? So on the left graph, I put up 7 purchasing buckets, the non-payers, 0 to 2, 2 to 10, and so on, up until, let's call them the high payers in our app, which are the $100 plus users, okay? And on the second column, the group weight, meaning just how many users came from this specific group in our retargeting campaign. So for example, 17% of our retargeting campaign was composed of non-payers and 30% was composed of high payers, okay? We call it that way. And on the third column, this is already the statistics after the retargeting occur, okay? The third and the fourth column. So on the third column, the probability to be converted is the payer to install or to retargeting install ratio. So we see the difference between the groups. Let's take the first and the last group, which is the non-payer and the $100 plus payer. And we see the conversion probability of the two of these groups. Like the first one has 4% and the last one has 26%. So we see a very significant difference in their statistics, but a more significant difference we see that on the percent of total revenue from the entire retargeting campaign, okay? Let's take the 100% as the total revenue we got from the retargeting activity and split it between the groups. And we see that the $100 plus users that were initially, I remind you, like $100 before they retargeted, generated on the retargeting campaign 78% of the revenue of the retargeting campaign, whereas the second largest group, which are the non-payers in our app, 17% of the users, generated only 1.4% of our retargeting campaign. So we see by this slide that valuable users are mainly paying users, and like even whales should be retargeted much more drastically than the non-payers. Okay, so after moving through the value and churn terms, let's go on to find the right time to retarget, okay? So let's take this churn curve, I call it, and they can help us very much in deciding when to retarget our users. So let's take three scenarios. The first one on purple is the 3 days cutoff. The second one is after 21 days. And the third one is between 9 and 12 days in green here, okay? So the first one, after 3 days, pretty much resemble us the risk in retargeting too early, right? Because we don't see the axis here, but at least there is a 75% chance that the user will return organically on their own. So we wouldn't want to retarget in this period of time because they'll most likely return by themselves. On the second scenario, the blue vertical line, at tops, they will be returning on probability of 35%. So this is probably too low, and maybe we wouldn't want to retarget too far away. So the third option might be the most relevant, between 9 and 12 days. This region is tricked by the probability of 35 to 65%, which I think of sort of a coin flip, where we the user will return organically or not, like we are flipping a coin. And we want our retargeting campaign to make a bias to this coin, to make a bias in our favor. So the users will return in a higher probability than they won't. Okay, so after moving through these two sections, we move to the last section, which is measuring the retargeting performance of your campaign. Okay, so let's go through some KPIs. Okay, so the first one, the traditional ROAS 3D or 7D. So after the retargeting event, as we said, we changed the attribution of the user to be set on the retargeting campaign, so that all the revenue that will be generated for this user after this certain point will be assigned to the retargeting campaign, and then divided by the spend that we have to do in order to return this user. And this is the ROAS, simple, right? Okay, the second one, lift from the target population. This is simply the division between the sum of revenue gained after the retargeting event divided by the sum of revenue before the retargeting event occurred. And here we assume that the user won't return by himself, so therefore the lift shows the gained revenue we have over the alternative, which is like zero addition if we assume that the user will never return by himself. Okay, the third one, conversion rate after the retargeting. So the conversion rate, as we've seen, should be much, much higher than your regular campaign that's running parallel to that. So this can be a very good indication to us that we are heading to the right direction if the conversion rate is very high, because if the conversion rate is high, we're probably bringing high pairs, initial high pairs, and this is a good indication. The fourth one, average number of days sent left. So we would like to see this measurement as high as possible, okay? Why is that? Because if a user returned after a very, very long certain period of time that he left, this is strengthened the validity of our retargeting campaign, right? So if we're looking at our number of histogram of users that returned after a certain number of days, 30, 60, 90 days after they left, it's very, very validate our retargeting campaign, and we can say that they returned solely by the retargeting campaign, and there was no chance that they would have returned organically because there have been such a long period of time. Okay, the last two pretty much completing each other. This is the percent of prior ways returned. So as we've seen, there is a direct linkage between the money spent by a user before retargeting and how much he spent afterwards. So we would like this to be as high as possible, right? Whale is up to your definition. And we would like the number non-pairs return percent to be as low as possible, since they don't give us very value. Okay, so after moving through these 6 KPIs, we have these 6 KPIs. How do we measure it? So let's say we've decided on a population to retarget, for example, paid more than 100 days in their lifetime, didn't visit the app for 30 days, and user at age 90 days or more. This is just a random campaign that you thought of. Now that we have this population, we can extract it through a query and then split it between like 80% that will see the ads and 20% in control that wouldn't see the ads. And okay, so and after a certain period of time, after the X days that this campaign ran, we can compare these 6 KPIs that we've seen between the groups, and we can see how much difference between the groups occurred, and this is pretty much the lift that you will be seeing through the retargeting activity, rather than don't retarget at all. Okay, so for summary, when trying to determine if a user has churned, we need to look at more features than the number of days he was absent from the app, right? As we've seen, if a user is a paying or non-paying user, it's critically affect the probability that he will return. What age did he left, and how many money did he spend in the app is very important to understand if he churned or not. Second, we would like to bring back only high-value users, and thus they will absolutely should be paying users. And third, there is a high correlation between the amount of money users spent in the past to what he will spend in the future, as we've seen from the table on the value discussion. Okay, thank you very much. There's questions. Thank you. Yeah.
How do you decide the CPAs for retargeting campaigns?
How do I decide?
CPAs, cost per acquisition, like how much money would you spend?
Okay. So this is less relevant questions, because I'm analyzing. This is more of a campaign manager thing. It's not like a analysis of a thing. So based on this cutoff, they decide it. I don't have an answer to that. Sorry. Yeah.
How do you decide on the combination between all of those? Basically, we see that 9 to 12 is a kind of sweet spot, and also you have different cohorts that you presented. How do you decide? Do you run campaigns across, or do you dedicate more budgets for particular cohorts? Obviously, there's a value to target different users, right?
Yeah.
So how these decisions are made?
Yeah, obviously, the more strict you are, the less of a reach you have, right? So reach should be an issue here. So pretty much the trade-off that I thought of is minimizing your retargeting population to what you want, testing how is the churn curve behaves for your population, right? If for example I took only users that paid $1,000 plus, so we see a very flat line, much flatter than we've seen. And so based on the population you ask, you seeing what churn probability they have, and based on this curve, you can think of around the 50% line or something like that, because too early is not good and too late is probably not good. Yeah. Yeah.
Do you tend to narrow things down just by one attribute? So for instance, narrow down age instead of, 20 to 30, narrow it to 22 to 25? Or do you take into account multiple attributes, so age 20 to 30 and also paying and also this?
Yeah, so it's definitely a combination of things. Obviously, a certain combination that I will do is only pairs. I will never return non-pairs to the app, and no matter what, I will never return after 3 days or 7 days. It's because the probability that they will return by themselves is far more likely that they won't. So. But obviously, you can take this churn curve, and I based it on data, and I can combine on a certain curve, even how many attributes that I want. I just filtered it through a query, right? So it's very customizable. Yeah. Okay. So, thank you very much.